Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of AWS Show Tell Generative AI. My name is Anil Nadiminti, and we have a great presentation today, a great demo show and tell. I'm joined by my fellow co-host Adam, and we
Hello.
have Paul and Laith joining us today. So, as we get into the session, we'll do quick introductions. But today's session is about vibe coding, right? So, who doesn't want to do vibe coding, right? Uh, that's an interesting topic, right? But I'll let Adam introduce himself, and then we go through the introductions quickly.
Hey, thanks, Anil. Adam Bloom here, Solutions Architect. Super excited to be here to talk about vibe coding. And great to be back here from 2 weeks ago, talk about MCP. So super excited about this one. Paul, do you want to go
Thanks.
ahead?
Sure. Hi, I'm Paul Vincent, architect here at Amazon Web Services. Looking forward to talking to you about vibe coding today.
Yeah, hey everybody. Thanks for tuning in wherever you are. My name is Laith Al-Sadoun. I'm a solutions architect here at an architect here at AWS, and who doesn't want to hear about vibe coding?
Exactly. Right. So, in today's session, I think we'll resume our one of our most popular episodes, which is MCPs. Adam demonstrated how we can do a lot of coding using MCPs, and I'll let Adam run the next part of the show here today. I'll be in the background, but let us know, folks, where you're joining from, and give us more details there. Right. So I'll let you run this, Adam. I'll go into the background.
Thanks, Anil. Appreciate it. So, Paul, Laith, can you guys just quickly describe what is vibe coding for those that don't know, and why is it such a popular thing right now?
Oh gosh, I mean, I guess vibing is like interacting and really kind of relating and getting into the zone of what you're doing, right? So when you vibe with your code, you're basically chatting with it and vibing with it to build what you're trying to achieve, right?
So what you're saying is you feel the AGI.
I feel like we're like kind of in AGI, but it's like a slow simmer. Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I actually catch myself talking to it as I'm vibe coding more like I'm talking to like Laith, if Laith were in the room talking to me. So it's more like that. It's like, hey, what do you think of this? This would be really cool, right? And then we try that and it does it. And then, yeah, that's just what I think of vibe coding. Yeah, it's just.
Yeah, it's like I feel like it's taking the industry, the world by storm. Just giving yourself to the AI in your coding projects. It's a lot of fun. So you guys want to go over and talk about like what you're going to be presenting and discussing today?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, real quick, I'll kind of just set the stage, kind of how we got to vibe coding up to this point, and then MCP. What does MCP have to do with vibe coding? So we'll talk a little bit about that. Paul will take over and start vibing with the code right after that.
Awesome. Yeah, let's do that. So yeah, like that's interesting, right? Like, because we talked about model context protocol before, MCP, which is all the rage for agents and breaking down those data silos. We announced Bedrock agents and that compatibility now. So now we're talking about vibe coding with MCP. So this is a really cool topic. I'm super excited about this.
Yeah.
So Paul, do you want to?
I think. Yeah, I mean, I think Laith's going to do some presentation real quick on our side, but real quick, I mean, from a vibe code point of view, we can vibe with our code assistants, right? We've been doing that for a while, and we can have good interactions with them. But what we're finding is that MCP is allowing us to actually connect up some like knowledge for the LLM and the assistant. So while we're vibing, it's aware of specific things. Like in our case here, we have a number of model context protocol servers, right, that are going to be dealing with AWS specific things, right? So how to look up, how do I code this particular thing in AWS? Well, if I don't know that as a coder, vibing with the LLM, it's going to be able to use MCP to actually go get that data for us in real time while we're vibing, right? So it's going to look it up. It's going to read the manual, basically, right? So that's kind of the idea around what we've got here today and how we're using MCP in vibe coding context.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Do you want to go and show your slides? We can get this kicked off.
Yeah, let's do it.
Heck yeah.
See if we get this on stage here.
Yeah, something I really like about the idea of vibe coding is that you kind of, get to really experience the intelligence of the models and, where it's going. So it's a really cool way to kind of, kind of give a real world test of the performance of these models. So really cool stuff. All right, you guys can go ahead and kick it off. Let's do this.
Yeah, let's dig in, right? So just a real crash course into this, right? So first of all, we all know models, LLMs are getting really good. This is just an index, super quick of how, just in the last few years, there's been this significant tick. So this is from Stanford AI Index report, exceeding human performance on several benchmarks. Performance gap between AI and humans is shrinking very quickly, according to these studies, like this one from Stanford. So this is across science questions, image classification, visual reasoning, and things like that. So the models, TLDR models, are getting really good, right? And so we heard from Anthropic, powerful AI systems will emerge in 2026, in late 2026, early 2027. And a system really means like the LLM acting with systems around it, not just the foundation model itself. And there's also this, when you talk about a system, you also think about the ability for this to run over complex tasks over extended periods of time, hours, days, or weeks, on a very specific task and really accomplish a lot and go off different paths, right?
Yeah. So really, Laith, that's a question I wanted to go over with from someone asking, like, is vibe coding for experienced folks, or is it for beginners? Can it be for everybody?
Yeah, so vibe coding, I think, can be for everybody. I think it definitely can. I can see it being used as a tool as well to actually learn about software development, learn about new technique, new libraries, things like that you haven't tried. Like I personally learned a bit of Rust with vibe coding. So I think that the possibilities are pretty huge.
Yeah, so it really feels like it's democratizing coding to a degree. Like it's really helpful to those that are super experienced, and like you said, it sounds like it can be really helpful to those wanting to learn.
Yeah, and I think for experienced developers, like this just gives us superpowers. Like I can do so much, and accomplish way more than I would have in the same amount of time. So that it's just really empowering. But also as like an experienced developer, there's this moment of like, I just have to let go of the anxiety and like, it's gonna go. I'm gonna check back in like 10 minutes and see where it. I don't know why that keeps happening, but I just kind of have to.
So we have another LinkedIn. Sorry, Laith. So we have another LinkedIn user asking, how about for non-developers? I think we're getting there, right? What do you think?
I think we're getting there, right? So if you think about the broad vibe coding ecosystem, beyond AWS and other places and other companies, you can go from prompt to application, right? So a really powerful way to prototype. Even some people moving from wireframes and going straight to, let's say, real front-end code, for example, to do their prototyping.
Yeah, I do think though that with vibe coding, at least where the models are today and probably for a bit, you still want to have a good understanding of what you're looking to achieve. I think it's the art of giving good instructions, which sounds easy, but it could really, vibe coding, at least for me, has really taught me to be really good and structured with what I'm asking and what I expect the model to do. I think that's really important. And so, what do you think about that? Like really understand, it's like you still want to understand like some best practices and things around like what you're trying to ask for. Because, if you ask for something vague, you might get something vague.
Yeah, I'll let Paul.
Yeah, I think the key to that is having enough experience to understand when it's taking you down the wrong path. I think is the key to vibe coding, right? Still today, I think it'll get better in time, but today I think you still have to be able to kind of have an idea what it's doing. Otherwise, you know, it can go off the rails pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's this concept in vibe coding called the death loops. So usually happens when your coding assistant maybe like truncates some context prior, and it kind of like thinks it needs to do something again or go over it again. And so there are it's not a perfect thing just yet, but I mean the possibilities are huge, and I mean the capabilities already today are just astounding.
Yeah, what kind of techniques have you guys? I mean, maybe you're going to get into this in the demo, but what kind of techniques have you guys like learned? Like what works really well to kind of make sure you don't go into that death loop or get out of it?
Yeah, so well, I'm glad you asked. You know, we're going to talk about what MCP Model Context Protocol does in the context of coding assistance, pun intended. If you didn't check out Adam's Show and Tell session last time, go and check that out for a deeper dive. But Model Context Protocol is a way of using tools and resources in agents, right? And really coding assistants like Klein or open source ones like that, and even things like Q Developer CLI, they're agents too, right? They just happen to have an IDE as the interface or a text editor, which then support MCP. So what we found was, you know, super interesting way to provide MCP servers in those coding assistants to customize the coding assistant behavior in such a way that it builds things the way that we expect, or the way that we do, like Paul and I in our prototyping team. So that was an interesting way to kind of steer it and build in a more consistent way.
Awesome.
So,
yeah.
no, you're good. You're good. So, you know, MCPs can do a lot of things. I would say in practice, you know, resources and tools are probably the most popular parts of what's exposed in MCP servers, and works really well. So, you know, Paul will show you a demo with Klein, and we'll just start vibe coding with it.
Awesome.
So, yeah. I'll wrap up with this real quick, right? So, you know, the question I get a lot is, what does AWS and MCP together mean, right? So in practice, I think a lot of people are using existing open source or commercial hosts and clients, like Q Developer CLI will support MCP very soon. And you can check out the open source and you'll see some of the discussions there. Like Adam talked about last time, inline agents and so on. You can build your own clients and hosts. And, you know, you can expect a lot more from us in this space as well, like running and you know, managing MCP servers and clients and so on. But then we also open source this project, the AWS MCP servers, where, you know, they're really our first use case for these MCP servers is coding assistance. Like, we literally built these for our own needs and our own purposes to develop very fast on AWS and build native applications that really target AWS. So this will be the end of the slides, I promise. Just, you know, check these servers out, play with them, and with that, I will hand over the screen share.
By the way, Laith and Paul, before we get into the demo, I just want to say, like, guys, check out these AWS MCP servers. They're really powerful, especially you know, if you're wanting to vibe code, because, like, for example, I was checking out the AWS documentation MCP server. I mean, that is such a cool resource to give your AI to check documentation. Like, at first I was checking it for myself, and then I'm like, wait a second, I can have the AI look up the documentation. And it's like, wow, that's a really powerful capability. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought these up. So let's see, New York City. I've had a lot of success vibe coding, from creating JSON data to DynamoDB to building full-blown apps. It's great. And yes, you need to be extremely specific. Yeah, well said.
Well, and so I'm glad you called that out. There's some really great MCP servers out there. Not to toot my own horn, and really, credit goes to a bunch of the folks on the team here for putting these out. But yeah, that's exactly the point. We wanted to figure out, if I'm a developer that's building something on AWS, what are some of the things, so I don't have to be as specific, right? Like if I want to build in the best way possible on AWS, then there's probably some common characteristics, right? You want to be on serverless, you want to be on fully managed type of services running on AWS. And so, of course, you want infrastructure as code. So we really built these things to simplify that flow. And of course, it always helps to be specific, but we wanted to get to the point where we didn't have to tell it every time, like, okay, do it this way on Dynamo. Okay, do it this way on Dynamo, like from one application to the next. And so those are things that we are bringing out into the MCP servers as a way to customize the coding behavior.
And that's why I was so excited about this particular demo, what you guys are about to demo here with vibe coding with MCP servers, because it's like, that's one of the mind-blowing things about MCP servers and AWS, is that it's not just about querying a database or doing RAG. It's like, hey, go look up this documentation while also using, looking up stuff in my database while also doing this other thing, all at the same time using, your agentic vibe coding workflow. And it's just such a powerful, eye-opening experience. I love it. Yeah. So we can go ahead and get into the demo if you want, Paul and Laith.
Yeah, sure. We'll fire. All right, cool. Let's see if this works. All right, cool. So what I got here is that, so just real quick, I want to show you the configuration I have for my MCP servers right now. These are the MCP servers that we have out in the open source that we've shared with you all. We've got core. Core is just there really to guide the prompt into best practices in terms of how to use all the rest of the AWS services in this particular suite for vibe coding out your solutions. We've got a Canvas MCP server. This is going to go ahead and make images for our GUIs and all of that, our web interface. It's going to make really nice, high quality, high res icons and backgrounds and things like that. It's really nice. We offer the Bedrock knowledge base retrieval. And so this one here is for all of you devs out there that maybe have a knowledge base internally, that you have like maybe internal proprietary things that you want to be able to use during your vibe session to build applications internally for your company. You can load that KB up and configure this knowledge base MCP, and it'll go actually interact with that while you're doing your vibe coding and grab that data that it needs to have contextual awareness to what you're trying to build internally for your application.
So awesome.
Yeah, for sure. And then CDK, of course, that's, Cloud Development Kit. So that's our way of doing infrastructure as code in a programmatic way. And this provides all the guidance around that you would need to deploy your solution into AWS in a repeatable manner.
And by the way, that CDK one, I mean, that's such a huge deal. I think, documentation in CDK, so many of us, are not, the classical software developer, even where a lot of us are infrastructure as code engineers, and having that access to CDK and the documentation, I mean, that is a big game changer, I think.
Yeah, it's huge. And actually just today, the team released Terraform, right? So we also have a Terraform one.
If you love Terraform, there's one for you.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Cost analysis, of course, with developing anything on AWS, we want to make sure it's within budget and cost aware for, the stakeholders within your company or whoever you're going to be using this with. This does a complete cost analysis via MCP. So it accesses those APIs directly in real time against what you've actually built and deployed within your CDK, and gives you that cost reporting on that for that. So
Paul, I have a question on the cost analysis, if that's all right. So as you're vibe coding, let's say you hook up that cost analysis MCP server. As you're vibe coding, does it tell you, what the cost is, in near real time as it's vibe coding with you?
Yeah, so you could ask it to do that, of course, and it would. It'd be, what the way we've been using it is more at the end of the solution to, tell us what this is going to deploy to cost this in to AWS. What would that cost be?
That's awesome.
But yeah, absolutely. Anywhere in the middle of your vibe, you could be like, hey, what's the cost running me right now? I want to keep things in check or whatnot, and it could do that for you. Yeah, for sure.
So does it have the ability to do like a cost calculator kind of function as well for what you've maybe built already?
It does. So you could let's just say you had a code base and you just loaded it up in VS Code here, right? You could just say, hey, use cost analysis MCP server to do a report against this solution I've already built, and it'll build that report for you for sure. Yeah,
that is awesome.
Yeah, it's cool. Documentation one is the one you alluded to earlier, where it'll just anything it's not aware of, right, within the general knowledge of the LLM, it will use the documentation server to get really expert advice or guidance on how to configure a particular service or code against a particular API. Maybe there's a Boto 3 call or something that needs to happen that the LLM's not quite sure of. It'll use this to actually make that, to build your Lambda functions and whatnot. And then we have a diagramming server that will build various diagrams. So architectural diagrams, flow diagrams, all different types of things you could possibly think of from a diagram point of view.
You guys have picked like a really great mix of MCP servers. Like, so the diagram one, does that use like Mermaid code, or is it actually like using AWS stencils?
Laith, you built it. Want to tell about it?
Yeah, I'm excited about this one. So I kind of took a maybe contrarian approach. So it does not use Mermaid. It actually uses an open source library called Diagrams, which is built on top of GraphViz. And the way it works is, and so it does use the AWS icons. It can also do other type of diagrams as well, like sequence and class diagrams and things like that. But awesome. It actually asks Klein, which is the coding assistant that Paul is using here. It basically instructs Klein to write Python code that uses this diagrams library, and then it executes that code securely. And there's a bunch of checks for insecure code before it runs on the server. But what you get is your infrastructure diagram as code, including really nice groupings of your applications, like APIs versus database and things like that. So really easy to just plug into actually anywhere you use MCP. So if you're not using Klein, you can also use these in other places. And that's, of course, the beauty of MCP, right?
Oh my gosh, I love this. So you can go from ideation with Klein and AWS and eventually Amazon Q and start building your project, your application out, reference official documentation, Terraform as well as CDK. And then once the project is all done, you can see the cost, get a cost calculation for that, and then get your architecture diagram cooked as well. That is amazing. Like, really awesome job. I do want to ask one more question on the MCP server side, just really quick. I noticed there was a core MCP server from AWS Labs. Do you want to just go over that really fast?
Yeah, so the core server is there. So it has one tool in it. It's called prompt understanding. And what it does is it takes like the initial prompt that you have given it. Like in this case here, I've pasted in my prompt that we're going to have here, which is, kind of just a vibe, just a, hey, this is the kind of thing I'm trying to build for, maybe it's a customer, or maybe it's internally or whatnot. And it'll take that and it'll translate that into AWS speak on the back end. So it has a better idea of what services that it may be able to use. It also references all the other MCPs that I have loaded from AWS Labs. So it knows when to use those in the right order, right? So when to use the diagramming, when am I going to be using the cost, when am I going to be using the CDK, those types of things. So that's all within inside of the core server. Yep.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah. This is so freaking cool. Like I've been using some of these MCP servers, but I'm even more excited now to use the diagram and the cost. Like, this is awesome.
So for this one here, we're just going to build a quick app. Now, there's no way we could finish this in the time we have allocated for sure. So what I wanted to show on this this is a relatively vague thing with some specific points to it. But I want to highlight how we'll see how it will use the AWS document server to actually go query some of the things like IoT and things like that, right? On how to do some of these things that I'm asking it to do. And I always start it off in plan mode because I find that it's much easier to make corrections and adjustments if you need to when you're in plan mode versus just straight on act, right?
And Paul, can you give us just a quick overview of Klein and what your setup looks like here?
Yeah, so this is Klein. So Klein it's just an extension inside of Visual Studio. We have on my profile, I'm able to connect it to an AWS profile. My provider is AWS Bedrock, and so we're using Bedrock as our provider. I'm using Cloud 3.7 Sonnet as my model provider, and I'm using cross-region reference or cross-region inference to help us with a little bit of the availability. But that's about it from a configuring your provider. And then what this allows us to do is interact with Bedrock is using Sonnet 3.7 as our model in the back end. So
yeah, I think what's really cool about Klein is it's open source. You just drop it into VS Code. There's no additional charges for Klein. You basically can set it up with your AWS account and Amazon Bedrock, and you're pretty much good to go. And then, of course, the MCP servers you can configure, and there's no additional costs associated with those. You just pay for the Bedrock API tokens there.
So real quick, in Klein, if you do click this little guy up here, this is the MCP configuration, and this is the marketplace here. And if you search for AWS, you'll see that you'll get all of our servers are available within the marketplace. So you can just go one-click install, and they'll drop right into your client configuration.
That's awesome. Yeah, and by the way, just for those that don't know, if you're building applications, like let's say you deploy to EKS, our Kubernetes service in AWS, and you want to have a more distributed application, and you still want to leverage these MCP servers, you can, correct me if I'm wrong, Leif, but you can, and Paul, you guys can call these MCP servers via HTTP as opposed to STDIO, which is what you do locally for MCP servers. That's how Klein kind of sets it up initially within VS Code, more of a local MCP server installation, but you can also use these MCP servers remotely over HTTP as well. Still using MCP, which is awesome. Yeah,
for sure. So real quick, just to be on this, I touched on it once. So plan versus account or act mode here. Plan is just basically gonna help us talk through. So this is where we're gonna be vibing a lot, just kind of ideation, right? So back and forth with the model on what it hears me saying. It'll give me some ideas. I can throw some other ideas at it, and it won't build anything, right? In plan mode. As soon as you switch open to act mode, then it'll start building out the solution that we build. So we'll go ahead and kick it off here in plan mode and see what it does. It should immediately want to use my MCPs to start interacting with me. So first thing, it wants to do is use core for the prompt understanding that we talked about earlier, right? I always run in approve personally, just so that I can see what it's doing. Some of my friends are a little more adventuresome than I, and will let it do everything by itself, but I like to
I have sent a prompt and just got up from my desk a couple of times. It's you just gotta let go sometimes.
you gotta feel the vibes. Yeah, I do the same thing. I auto approve, but sometimes that goes in the death loop. But I found some mitigations to help with that.
So as we can see here, it already kind of is getting some good ideas about what we wanted. It created me an implementation plan, figured out all the different pieces I need for the various things that I'm trying to do within, property management, some IoT devices, managing that. So I'm pretty happy with what it's come up with. I'm just going to go ahead and switch to act mode so we can start acting on things. So the first thing it just does is creates its, directory structure. One of the things that we toyed around with as well. So when it's doing a CDK project, it actually calls CDK itself in order to build the init, to build the project structure, everything we want it to do, rather than trying to decide how to do that itself. That's part of the plan within MCP.
Yeah, and for those watching, if you notice, you can also do the auto approve. You can be kind of fine grained with that control there, right, Paul and Leif?
You can, for sure. You can approve, MCP. You can approve computer use. All the various things that the LLM will want to have access to, browser use, whatnot. Again, I like to just kind of read what it's doing before I click approve on all the things that I do. But maybe one day I'll get a little more adventuresome in this.
Yeah, someone said this is like science fiction turned to versus science fact. I completely agree. There we go. Thanks. Create the imaginable. Yeah, this is amazing, isn't it? What a time to be alive.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
We got a comment. What's your vibe coding style? Plan versus act? Yeah, I mean, what I've found is that, spending a good amount of time in plan before you go to act is usually a good idea. It hopefully even like helps you formulate and navigate what you're trying to build before you send it off on act. So it definitely gives usually consistently better results.
Yeah, like I'd also just add to that too. Like I think the way that large language models work in token generation, right? When you go into plan mode, it kind of forces the model to produce more tokens and kind of think through it step by step, chain of thought reasoning. And so then when you go into act mode, it takes that what it had to think through and then sends it into act mode. So it gives it more information, more context, and probably increases the likelihood of success, at least in my experience.
Yeah, it does for sure. So when you're in that plan mode, since it does build out that step-by-step plan of attack, it follows that very strictly, and which is better than just shooting from the hip within account or act mode the whole time, right? Just blindly building things, right?
Looks like we have a question from Jake. Are you all planning integrating AWS MCP directly into Amplify applications? This would make life so much easier. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I'd love to take a stab at that. So glad you asked. So I guess there's a few different ways to take that question, right? The way we're thinking about it is how do we make it super easy to build your full stack applications on Amplify on AWS? And so think about having an MCP server that would bring Amplify documentation straight to your like the latest documentation and relevant to what you're trying to build, right? So that's kind of how we're thinking about it for full stack development. And so we definitely have our sights set on full stack applications on AWS, and whether you run that on Amplify or more traditional setup like S3 and CloudFront for CDN, kind of allowing a few of those options.
Yeah, it almost is like let's MCPify everything, and it's going to completely change how we interact with the cloud and our data. I think we have another question from Create the Imaginable here. How does it get the AWS rules to do what it needs on AWS, and does it need a do all AWS service role?
And I think that's related to the client setup as well, right? Like the roles and stuff that we're using. Paul, you want to talk about our profile?
Yeah. So we can do that. So if we look in client's configuration again, so using AWS CLI for setting up your profile is basically the profile that client will use or the assistant will use to do inference on Bedrock, right? So that's just the model access alone. Then everything that you build from that point of view on the command line, you can give it, this is the profile I want to use that's based on the account that I want to deploy to. So they don't have to be the same account. So you could have an account that you just say, maybe your administrators have given you read-only access to Bedrock, for instance, right? So you can invoke Bedrock commands, invoke model, but you can't do anything else in that account. That's the profile that you would use here. Within your client configuration. And then when you go to do like a CDK deploy, you would just use a profile, -- profile to target whatever account you wanted to deploy to, dev, staging, whatever you want, right? That would be the way to do that. And then within inside of the MCPs themselves, if we look at the configuration file, the raw configuration file, like for instance, Nova Canvas, right, needs a profile of where it can actually call a Nova Canvas invoke model when you're going to create images and things like that. And so you can set each one of those up with a different profile to be able to have different access to different accounts, right? Rather than the target account that you're going to go for. So when you're setting up client and your assistants, these are all the tools accounts that you would be using, right? The accounts that you have access to do inference against Bedrock and things like that, versus where you're actually going to deploy the solution to would be another account, right? Separate from your tooling account.
Great answer, Paul. One more question I want to get to is Nand asks, how does Klein handle context window limitations during extended code generation sessions? Is there a risk of it forgetting earlier instructions as new content is generated? I mean, I think that probably depends largely on the model. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it does. So what I do is I have it, usually I'll set up in front and just say, hey, as you're going along, I'd like you to keep a developer log, right, of everything we're doing. Because if you do hit that and you have to start a new session, then it's easier for the model to pick back up from that log that it's been keeping track of all the things that it's done already, rather than reinterrogate the entire project, especially if you're pretty far down the line with it. So having it create that kind of checkpointing log along the way is one of the things I do to help with that. But you do hit that context. If it's a large application, you will hit it. Yeah, especially if you're doing a lot of browser use, right? So if you're doing a front end and there's lots of, it's using the browser, it's logging into it, it's checking the layout of the GUI, that type of thing, that will blow the context up pretty quickly, and then you'll be starting again. So I don't know, Laith, if you have more to add there.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much spot on. You know, if you're using the model, it obviously has its own context window. Klein does do some stuff where it tries to manage the context length over a long period of time. So you'll see that it's not like just packing in the max context. So there is a risk, and like Paul said, having some sort of checkpointing or asking it to save. You can even ask it like, hey, create a markdown file of what we've done so far, and it'll kind of save as like a handoff or a project brief. So that's a neat little hack.
Yeah, Laith, that's funny you mentioned that, because like that's something I've recently started doing. I do two things when I start a project. One, I go into plan mode and ask it to say, hey, break down my requirements, my goals, my constraints, all that into milestones, put it in a markdown file as my project plan. And then I also instruct it in the system prompt to say, hey, anytime you experience an error and you troubleshoot it, and then you have a fix action, log that. So I create an error log in Markdown as well. And then I find what really works too is that each session is focused on one milestone. And then once that's good and done, I go to a new session, fresh, but I have it reference the project plan to start that next milestone. And I usually find that I've been finding recently that's worked pretty well.
Yeah, I'll add one new thing that I just learned about. You can ask to save a checkpoint, or sorry, a checklist as a markdown file, and have it like periodically go into the markdown, and it will tick off the X on the checklist.
Oh, that's cool.
Your project. It's amazing. Like, this stuff is just mind blowing.
Yeah, that's really cool. Gen X Retro says, I wish every code file or directory in a project with Klein had the ability to use its own context. Code file directory.
Let me see if I understand the question. I guess there's a few different ways you interact with coding assistants, right? And some of them, you have this chat agent like we're seeing in Klein. And then you also have like inline autocomplete and things like that in your IDE as well. So it depends on where you are and like where you're trying to make the edit. Are you trying to actually edit the text file in line? In which case that autocomplete will have the context of that file, and usually, and it depends from editor to editor, but usually it will have the context of the tabs you have open in your editor, and then of course the file itself as an example. And then when you go into Klein, as another example, you can actually say, like, you could point it to a directory and say, hey, like, we're going to focus on this directory, and you can reference that, or even point to a specific file and so on. The last thing I would add to that is, this space is just evolving so quickly, and Klein, very, very powerful, but there are other coding assistants out there that support MCP. Rue Code is actually a fork from Klein. Super interesting, some really great ideas they have there as well around boomerang tasks and different customized modes. So, really, wanted to kind of talk about MCP in the context of Coding Assistant, and try the different ones, and let us know which one works for you, and let us know in our repo as well, like in our GitHub, AWS Labs/MCP. Let us know what it's like vibing with these MCP servers in your Cline, RuCode, Cursor, Windsurf, QCLI. That's really what we want to hear about, and that's why we built with MCP, so that you can use it wherever you're using, wherever you can use MCP, right? Which is, there's a lot of places.
Yeah. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to another editor I have here, where I have another completed application, because this one's going to take probably more time than we have to complete. And I want to go in and we can diagram that one. So I don't have any diagrams in that. And so we'll have it review and do a diagram so you guys can see how that kind of works. And then we'll do a cost analysis on that solution to see how that works as well. So let's do that.
Yeah, Jake, I think has another question here real quick while we're switching there. Jake is asking, is AWS MCP optimized for deep think models like Claude 3.7 or DeepSeek, or should it be good to go with Nova Lite and Nova Micro for cost savings?
I think so the question isn't really just so much about the MCP servers, right? It's really more about the code assistant and as a client to the MCP servers, right? And so really powerful agents, the top models on Sweep, Benchmark, and things like that do have kind of a deep thinking capability. So it certainly helps when you use a reasoning model or a hybrid reasoning model like 3.7 with your coding assistant.
Yeah, that brings a good point, Laith. Like, Cline is amazing, obviously, as an AI coding assistant with MCP and AWS MCP servers. There's also Claude for desktop and Amazon Q coming, but you could actually create your own MCP client as well. There's a bunch of GitHub repos out there that kind of walk you through that and help you create those clients. So really, there's a lot of different things you could do there. And I think, Laith, you kind of hit on this. You probably want to choose a model that's really high on the coding benchmarks to work with MCP.
Yeah, I think especially for coding assistants, and like you said, you can use MCP, you can make your own clients, and you can also, just for being cost conscious, right? We did recently add prompt caching for Nova, as well as Claude 3.7 and Haiku 3.5. So prompt caching saves a lot with coding assistants. Like the token usage and the cost drops a lot. So super easy, literally check the box and you can start trying it out with prompt caching as well. Great way to optimize on the cost.
That's awesome. That's a good idea there. So Paul, do you want to kind of describe what you're asking here?
So yeah, I'm just saying, so the app's done, right? Let's see how much it's going to cost to deploy. Use MCP to figure this out.
This is so cool.
So it should say, yeah, I've got an MCP that does that, and it should kick it in. What I love too about vibe coding is that I'm a horrible speller and it doesn't care. It still knows what I want to do.
I know. I feel you on that.
All right. So here we go. It's going to use AWS Labs Cost Analysis, MCP. And it's going to take a look at the CDK and the project and do all the analysis of it, and then give us a markdown report. So right now it's going against, so the MCP is going against our real-time API for cost. And so it's going to make some of those queries. You can see how much it knows we have Cognito, how much is that going to cost, and all the things.
This is awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love clients so much. And I'm super excited for the integration with Amazon Q, because there's already so many powerful features with Q, such as checking for OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities and all those kind of things. I think that the MCP compatibility is going to be huge. for vibe coding.
Yeah, and I can take a couple of questions here on the chat. Create the imaginable. Can it fix bugs? Yes. Yes, it can.
Thankfully.
Yeah, I mean, usually, I mean, even if it creates bugs, which, you know, occasionally it does, it will like fix it, syntax errors and things like that. You can also, again, this is an implementation of Klein. So if you're using Klein, you can actually select parts of your code and say add to chat and things like that, and have it fix it. So that's really neat.
Yeah, I noticed too, like in the problems, you know, you have the problem section in VS Code. You could just right click on that too and say fix with Klein, which is really cool.
Yeah, it totally is next level friendly creative seal. Yes.
Yeah.
Tom Drzinski, I would love to hear more thoughts on how to consolidate MCP servers. I think, you know, our point of view is that, you know, grouping servers into sort of logical units to accomplish an action the way an actor would on AWS kind of makes a lot of sense. So, you know, we're not building an MCP server for like every different documentation for every different server. That's why we have like the one documentation MCP server, and infrastructure as code. So yeah, I mean, let us know in the again, let us know on the issues and the discussions on the GitHub page, your thoughts, your feedback. Yeah, and some clients, I think Cursor has a limit on the number of MCP servers and tools. So you know, thinking about where you know, where you pick and choose those MCP servers.
Yeah, lathe paw, something that's interesting to me too. Like I've read some like folks having success with up to like 40 MCP servers, you know, with a single agent. But I do agree with you that like, it seems like you really want to make sure your agent is very narrow to a specific action or task or use case, and therefore your MCP servers that it would leverage would also be focused on that as well, as opposed to just throwing everything in the kitchen sink at a single agent. But have you guys like thought about or seen like anybody, you know, use a ton of MCP servers all at once?
Yeah, I mean, I think what happens is it you know, it confuses the model, right? If you have too many, especially if they're similar operations, right? So if they're similar operations, it can get confused on which one you actually wanted to use, unless it's really dialed in from a metadata point of view and it understands exactly which one from a description point of view. But yeah, so like I had a few that were very similar, and what I was finding myself doing is going into the configuration and disabling them, right? When if I didn't specifically want to use that one, I was disabling it, and that helps with managing that, right? And being able to quickly just toggle them on and off is kind of the way to handle it right now.
Yeah, that makes sense, and it really makes sense too, because you know I also go back to like classical machine learning, right? Where you have too much noise, you know, it can confuse the AI, and I feel like that's the same still true here with these large language models. Whether you're doing MCP or retrieval augmented generation or RAG, you really want to focus your data and focus your actions on a specific, you know, amount of data or resources or tool use, because it just becomes too much noise. I almost feel like it's very human like in a way, right? Like, you know, if I took you to Home Depot and said, you know, hey, build a bird box, but I just put you in front of 1,000 different tools, it'd probably take you a minute to figure it out. And maybe someone would get confused with that many tools to choose from. So it's really interesting. So Paul, we're just continuing to go through the cost calculator here, or
it's about done, I think. So it goes through each service, right? And so it's of course it's a call out and then a context and then a calc, and so it's going through all the different services that are within this particular solution right now, and it looks like we're about there.
Oh, awesome!
So yeah,
this is so cool. You guys
this is super neat, by the way, the cost estimate or the cost analysis, because you know, we also give it some instructions to sort of ask for context, ask for your assumptions. Like, you know, these are all, you know, with Bedrock, it's serverless, you know, tokens in, tokens out. And it helps to have some assumptions on like how many users, how many tokens and chats and conversations especially when you're using vibe coding to build GenAI apps. It's just like turtles all the way down, but using AI to make AI. But it helps with the cost analysis to include some of those assumptions.
That's awesome. I think Nathaniel here has a question. Is it possible to keep the project split into more files rather than fewer to avoid hitting the token limit when files get too large?
I would say the answer is yes. I've seen some patterns where you can basically give custom instruction and say, hey, like keep files shorter than 500 lines of code, just some instructions like that. Also, telling it to follow good programming best practices. So giving it a little hint to say, always use dry, right? Dry is DRY, don't repeat yourself. And, break things into single use principle, right? That sort of thing. All of those little things that you would think about as you're developing, you would kind of want to put that into Klein or your coding assistant.
Yeah, it sounds like prompt engineering is still critical to success in steering model behavior.
It is, but I think what we want to do with MCP is a way to take out some of the guesswork and provide that guidance and just say, hey, like use this set of MCP servers a certain way in a certain sequence, and those servers will return back either real-time documentation or other tools to just do it, right? So trying to actually remove the prompt engineering is a good way to think about this.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because you can embed those prompts in an MCP server for that specific data source. That's a brilliant way to scale that. I mean, that's awesome. And that way the AI developer doesn't have to think of every possible thing under the sun and how to deal with different data.
So here's the markdown that it created or the structure it created for the cost analysis. It had a little hiccup wanting to put it into a file format, but it created the JSON format, right, that it would then use for its reporting. But yeah, you can see here that it breaks it down by service, right? Does some free tier. It understands that there's a free tier in there just in case that's in, does that calculation in there. It analyzes the right capacity for like Dynamo tables, right? How many invocations of a Lambda function, all the details and assumptions that it takes based upon X number of users, and then creates the full on, recommendations at the bottom and also best practices, right? Based upon the project that it's seen.
That's awesome. And you could probably just like, hey, generate some pretty graph for me in Python or something using that data.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. And I think right now it's actually going to create our architectural diagram here. So hopefully.
Oh, is it awesome?
Real quick before we run out.
Do you guys see that with vibe coding, folks creating their own custom MCP servers for their data sources, say they're, running on AWS, they have their DynamoDB tables, or they have a bunch of data in S3. Do you see that as a pattern going forward?
For sure. For sure. I think customers are going to use this from, AWS point of view, this model, this pattern, right, for their own internal dev practices to be able to connect to their internal proprietary things that that aren't public, right, that the models aren't aware of. And that's kind of one of the key features here, right? Maybe it's coding standards, maybe it's tool chain standards, those types of things that you want to kind of make sure it's part of that vibe session so that the vibe isn't just, creating whatever it wants, right? Because the model will do that. If you don't give it some guidance, it'll create whatever you want. And what we're trying to build with this is the mechanism for it to be able to have a little guardrail, right? So do things the way we want to do it. So we can still dev really fast, but we can be confident that it's doing it the way that we want it to do it, the way our team should be doing it if it was a manual process.
I'm so glad you guys built servers. Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Anil.
Yeah, glad to be back here. From the background, right? So, look at the application being built end to end, just from requirements, and being able to give our own requirements. I saw Paul probably even changing some spellings. I don't know if that was on purpose, but we're looking at um, an end to end application being built. I know that we're coming close on the time here, and we're also trying to show the MCP that will build the diagram, architecture diagram. That would have been cool to show, but I know that we're getting close on the time, folks. We definitely want to encourage you to start exploring some of the MCPs, that we have shown today, and get your, vibe going, right? So um, there's a lot that we've seen today. Paul and Lyeth, thanks for sharing more on this. Adam, um, excellent session, right? What do you
Yeah, this is
think?
awesome. This is so exciting. Thank you guys, Paul and Leith, for your hard work on this. Like, man, this is just the beginning, and I am super excited. Are there any more MCP servers that we should be excited about? Can you speak to that at all, Leith or Paul?
Yeah, stay tuned. Yeah, we like we said, we just launched Terraform. Front end engineering is coming. Synthetic data is one that we get a lot, right? So like, hey, I want to build this prototype. I want to vibe code, and I want to give it some data to actually like fill it out, put some meat in the bones. And of course, community contributions. It is an open source project. We do take PRs and community contributions. Happy to work with you through that. I just want to leave with one thing, right? Like thinking about MCP as a way to customize your coding assistant behavior is like the number one thing. So, using our MCP servers, using ones that you build, your existing internal developer platforms as, data sources, it's all kind of putting that into your coding assistant to build the way that you would build and the way you want to.
So awesome. Yeah. This has been great.
Excellent, right? So this is a fast-moving space. Open source GitHub repositories. Start playing with all of those M servers out there, and start vibing with the code. So we'll definitely catch up in. We'll probably see you, Paul and Lyeth, in another session, right? As we conclude on this one, but a lot coming up. Next week we are going to have in the Show and Tell episode. We're going to have speech. Generative AI with speech, and we have our Nova Sonic models, and we're going to show a whole lot. So that's going to be pretty exciting. Definitely tune in same time. Excited to chat with you again. Thanks all for watching.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Leith.
Paul, yeah.
See you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.